Welcome back to the Steel City Roundtable, kids. My name is Mark Kneebone, and I'm your host. Welcome back to the Steel City Roundtable, folks. I am Mark Kneebone. I am your host. I've been out of it for a little bit. I did a brief, 15-minute thing a couple weeks ago. As I explained in there, I've been dealing with some of my own stuff, so I am back and ready to hit it, running hard. For those of you who this is your first time joining me, once again, my name is Mark Kneebone. I am a 12-year veteran of the Pittsburgh Police Department here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I resigned in 2019. In 2023, I had hit rock bottom for the last time after 34 years of drinking, and ended up in rehab after some very dark thoughts, and I guess you could say a suicide attempt. I didn't really do anything, but I was prepared. And here I am a little over 3 years later, sober, talking to you guys, trying to remind you that recovery is a full contact sport. It takes a team to survive and be happy. We don't have to do this on our own. Moving forward, what better way to start my return than to address the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous? Now, for those of you who've been here before, you know that I have spent a lot of time in AA, and by my own admissions, I did not follow their program the way they want you to do it, but I still work the 12 steps. I still believe the steps are very important for us to become self-aware and to continue our recovery journey and to stay sober and to stay happy. So let's hit it. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to approach each step by itself, 1 through 12. I'm not going to read them to you because you don't need to, you don't need that kind of guidance. I'm going to tell you the step, and then I'm going to go through my experience with the step and my opinions and my thoughts and how I differ from AA to show you guys that the steps are there for us to utilize, and they are a suggested plan of recovery, which means it is suggested that you do the 12 steps in your recovery to have a more beneficial long-term journey in sobriety. So let's get at it. Step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives have become unmanageable. Sounds pretty simple in itself, right? Hey, listen, my life was shit. I couldn't deal with things. Alcohol ran my life. Those are the stereotypical responses you get when someone finally comes to terms with the first step. Now, as we all know, these steps are interchangeable with NA, Narcotics Anonymous, and life in general. You just remove the alcohol, add the substance or the issue that's going on in your life right then and there, and you can work the steps to deal with life, not just addiction. But we are here to talk about the addiction aspect, the mental health aspect, because that's what I am. I am a recovering alcoholic head case with a law enforcement background. So I'm very cognizant of what it's like for first responders to deal with these struggles. And I do promote mental health, good mental health, and addressing addiction in the first responder community. It's not the focus, but it is important to me. So if you're one of my brothers in blue, or if you're a first responder, fireman, corrections officer, paramedic, you name it, if you work with the public, in my mind, you're a first responder. If you respond to horrible situations and try to make them better, you are a first responder. Don't forget nurses, doctors, ER doctors. I mean, the gamut is huge. It encompasses so many different aspects other than just police officers. But my experience comes in that realm, so that's where I come from. So what does step 1 actually mean? When you look at it, break it down. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Now, I'm going to tell you, with 34 years of heavy drinking in my past, although it's a very short and simple phrase, it does not come easy. Admitting that you are powerless over anything at all is going to be difficult. Now, coming from a law enforcement background with a type A personality where I'm used to solving problems, fixing problems, I'm not used to having the problems. It took me till I was 49. Started drinking when I was 17. It took me till I was 49 to admit that I was powerless over alcohol. And let me explain to you what that means in my life. So when I was still with the police department, I was drinking a half gallon a day. I was still married at the time to my first wife, who is now my ex-wife, thank God. And I can remember that there was nothing I wouldn't do to drink. I would blow off friends. I would blow off, overtime. I would blow off engagements that I'm involved in. I love to golf. I would blow off golf outings. I would blow off rounds of golf with my buddies. I wouldn't go to the gym just so I could drink. Now, so many of us can sit there and go, yeah, I've been there. I understand that. I know that. Well, it gets deeper, kids. Those are just the external demonstrations of how much power I gave to alcohol. Now, not only did I isolate and ignore anything that was healthy for me, I would race to the gas station after work to get beer. I would race home afterwards to start drinking. I would walk right through my living room, not even address my ex-wife, who was my wife at the time. I wouldn't even address her. I would go right to the booze, start drinking, and I would drink until I went to sleep. And this was every night. An example was during COVID. During COVID, I was actually out of the police department and I was working as a truck driver like I am now. And we couldn't get alcohol in Pittsburgh. So I started off by driving to Ohio to get a case of liquor, 12 bottles, and thinking that would last us, a couple weeks, 3 weeks. At the end of the week, I'll be going back to get more alcohol. And then it became stricter in Ohio. Then I had to go to a connection in West Virginia, in Wheeling, and I would pay double the price for the same liquor that I got in Ohio to get it from Wheeling. But I didn't care, because all I did for those 2 months was drive a truck, come home and drink. No conversations with my wife at the time, no interactions, no date nights, no let's go do something together, let's go for a walk, let's get out of the house. It literally was, I was a shell of a human being who all I did was drink nonstop. So imagine driving a truck for 12, 13, 14 hours and then coming home and drinking till you're hammered, going to sleep, getting up and doing it the next day. Most people would say that is a definition of insanity. I now would tend to agree. But even at that time, I found ways to justify what I was doing. I wasn't admitting that I had a problem. I would say, oh, well, it's COVID. There's nothing else to do. So, normal people sit at home and drink. Probably not the truth, but it was my truth. And, it's pretty scary when I look back on it to think about what I was actually doing to myself, what I was doing to my mental health, what I was doing to my body. My marriage was in a shitter no matter what. It was just a failed marriage. It never was going to succeed. But did the alcoholism and the heavy drinking play a part in speeding up the end? Yes. And I have to be grateful for that, because if it wasn't for the drinking and the things that were going on, who knows, we might have stayed together another year or two and just made each other more miserable. And then I would have missed out on meeting my wife now, Shelly, the lovely Princess Chiquita, who will, by the way, be doing her first episode with me next week. We don't know what we're going to talk about yet, but she's a little nervous. She's a little shy of the camera. So you got to make her welcome next week. But back to the game. That was my normal. That was okay. Like, it was like, oh, I would literally sit there and say to myself, oh, I have a problem if this continues after COVID. Oh, I have a problem if I drink more than a bottle a day. Oh, I have a problem if I start mixing liquor together, because I don't have a whole bottle of one thing, but I'll drink these two different things together because I have a little bit left. I mean, that was common sense to me. And to me, I didn't have a problem. So I was still in that denial that I had a problem. I still felt that I had some control over my life, not so much alcohol, but over my life, because I don't think we ever have control over the alcohol once we get into an addiction. That's just gone. We give that up. We just trade that in for the bottle. And that's what I did. So you're talking 2019, 2020. It's 2026 right now, right? And I got sober in 2023. What happened between then and 2023? Well, I got divorced. I moved. I continued to drink heavy, half gallon a day, every day, fucking as many as I could on the weekends, drink straight for 2 days. And then I would go to work. And, even then in 2022, when I was really starting to fade, I was not having any contact with my friends. I was not doing anything. I wasn't going to the gym, and I'm a gym guy. I just was living in a shell in a self-imposed prison in my apartment in Cranberry Township, Pennsylvania. Go to work, come home, drink, repeat. Go to work, come home, drink, repeat. And that was it. But yet still, at that time, I did not have a problem. In my mind, I was just living the way that I had lived for the last however many years, and it wasn't a problem. I could handle it. And that's a phrase you'll hear a lot. I can handle it. I'm in control. I'm okay. I'll survive. And these statements, these are people that are holding on by a thread, trying to justify to themselves that they don't have a problem because it is so fucking scary to think about going the other direction, to not drink and to allow whatever it is that's infiltrated your mind, allow that to come into existence and be recognized. One of the reasons I drank was to avoid dealing with my traumas, work traumas, relationship traumas, family traumas, whatever, all of them. And folks, they call it the PTSI now, post-traumatic stress injury. They used to call it post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think we're still getting it wrong. They say I have PTSD, PTSI. No, but what I have is OTSI, an ongoing traumatic stress injury. Now, one of the ways we get it wrong is we feel that the trauma's over. The psychologist and the therapist and the psychiatrist and the people that are the professionals that tell you you're okay or what you need to do to get right, they treat it like it's something that has happened and it is in the past. And that is completely nonsense, kids. The traumas that we have, they don't just go away because we get sober. They just don't go away because you deal with them in therapy and do early child work and do CBT and cognitive behavioral therapy. The traumas are always there and the effects of the traumas are always there. We are always experiencing pieces of these traumas throughout our lives. So it is not it is not in the past. It is ongoing and into the future. And for the rest of our lives, we have to deal with these traumas. How we deal with them, that determines whether or not we will live or die, to be honest with you. And, I'm telling you all these things because I believe in blatant and transparent honesty. And I feel that's the only way any of us can get better is to really talk and have open lines of communication and not hide things. So one thing I won't do with you guys, if it's your first time here, is I don't hide anything. If you want to reach out to me, steelcityroundtable@gmail.com. My phone number is 724-759-8600. And the website is steelcityroundtablepodcast.com. You can reach me there anywhere. If you need to talk, if you want to give me a suggestion, if you think I'm full of shit and you want to call me out, listen, reach out to me, come on the show. I don't turn anybody away. You want to talk, I'll talk. I'm kind of that way. But back to the first step, all these things that I was doing, all these behaviors that I had that to me were just the way I lived. They were a way for me to try to justify the debauchery and the bad decisions and the train wrecks that I was leaving behind me, that these things were okay and that this was just part of who I was as a person. And there was nothing I can do about it because I didn't have a problem. And all that shit came to a head the first week of May in 2023, where I had been on a bender probably 3 or 4 days, and I had reached that point where I just had enough. I got tired of climbing that wall and falling back down. And, you're talking 34 years of heavy drinking, at least the last 7 of just straight full on alcoholism, not taking breaks and not, thinking maybe I should stop drinking. Maybe I should take a break. I mean, I did that sometimes. I took some time off here and there, a week there, 2 weeks there, maybe a month there, but I would always celebrate afterwards by getting drunk. Like, you know what I mean? Well, how does that make sense? I would celebrate staying sober by getting drunk. And then I would be back out, and then, I'd do it all over again. I did this numerous times throughout my lifetime. Never anything sustained, never anything where I was truly happy when I wasn't drinking. I was always frustrated and irritable when I wasn't drinking. And I was so much better when I drank, because that's when I supplied my body with the dopamine and had the adrenaline flushes and was able to, I guess, operate at a normal level. So the first week of May in 2023, after this bender, now, granted, it took me about a month or so to remember everything that happened, because your brain's mush when you get off alcohol, if you're a heavy sustained drinker. And, through my therapy sessions and my rehab, the pieces started to come back together. And I sat down on my couch in my apartment, my 740 square foot apartment in Cranberry Township, where I lived by myself. And, my apartment looked like a bomb had gone off. It looked like it was a war zone. I hadn't been showering. I hadn't been cleaning. I hadn't been eating. I was drinking my food. And, this was going on for a while, but that week, that bender, when I got done, and I was a complete hot mess at the, probably talking like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Been drinking for like 3 days straight. And I went to my gun cabinet and got my Glock 23 and my little compact 9mm and loaded a magazine, chambered around, topped off the magazine, because that's just what you do. And I sat down on the couch with all the intentions of putting a bullet in my head. Why? Why had I gotten to this point in my life where I felt like that was the solution to the problem? And, 3 years later, thinking back on all these things, there's a whole different take to what happened. There's a whole different mentality to what I think I was actually trying to do and what was going through my mind when it occurred. Now, when I did that, I was done. I had given up. I was, I still wouldn't admit that I have a problem, but I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take that lifestyle anymore. And I couldn't see a way out, because I knew me. I knew that, if I just stopped drinking for a little bit, I knew I was going to get sick. I knew I was going to feel like crap. I knew all the things that I didn't want to deal with were going to come back to haunt me. And it's like, what am I faced with right now? In this hand, I have this lifestyle of complete unhealthiness, self-sabotage, isolation, being miserable, being in fear of flight 24/7, like just a miserable fucking existence. And then on the other hand, I had what happens when I stop drinking. And I think that is one of the reasons that people with our issues tend to not get help until it's too late, because the fear of what we don't know and what we feel is coming can take over our entire person, and I mean, honestly, folks, how many times have you had a situation? I know I've had 100 of them where, you did something stupid, or you did something that might come back to haunt you. And in your brain, you're going through what's going to happen if this comes out, or what's going to happen if you get caught, or what's going to happen if somebody finds out the things you're doing. We automatically take it up here, like the worst possible scenario. Like, I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to lose my wife. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my dogs. I'm going to lose my car. I'm going to lose my job. Like, I'm going to be in prison, and a cop in prison is no good because I'll have a full dance card because I'm kind of cute. I got a nice butt, and I was a cop. Like, that's not going to go well. Now, granted, none of the things I did would grant that ever happening, but your brain is so illogical when you're full on addiction that you become very creative. I am not a very creative person. Like, I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't do art. Like, the pictures I take are shit. Like, I'm not good at creating things. I mean, unless it's some wood and some tools, I can fuck around and maybe make it work. But, I'm just not a creative person at heart. And, when you're heavy in that addiction, your mind will create the scariest scenarios possible. And, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, how many times Can you remember that story you built in your brain of what was going to happen? How many times did it actually get that bad? Never. For me, it's been never. But I was so lost in emotion and illogical thinking that I spent all my time living in fear of what would happen if I quit drinking or if I got caught. And for a long time, fearing the things that I had suppressed for so long, that was the number one biggest fear for me, was how in the world am I going to address these issues that I had let fester and decay in my brain and in my soul for so long? You know, a couple things. One, I was in Brooklyn during 9/11, 6 miles from ground zero, remodeling a bowling alley and being there with like 300 people that were absolutely losing their minds because they had friends and family that worked in the towers. And, we're watching this on TV, and then we go outside and we're watching the building fall. Like, I'm not saying I'm some special person, right? Like, we all go through shit. And I wasn't directly involved in 9/11. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that being there and not being able to help people and watching this whole scenario play out, it had a very profound effect on my personality. I changed that day, and I didn't realize how big of a change I had gone through until years later, when I got sober for the last time. I had 3 friends that I worked with the city of Pittsburgh Police Department that got murdered on April 4th of 2009 in a domestic violence call. They were taken out. Premeditated, planned, strategy. This guy, man, he fucking had it ready, and he brought it. And unfortunately, I lost 3 people that I knew, one that was a close friend. And that leaves a mark on your soul. Then I have the family life that I grew up with, which is not the best family life. I had a bipolar mother who was batshit crazy 90% of the time, but then that 1%, she was an amazing mother. I'm not taking away from her as a mother. I'm taking away from her as never taking care of her issues. So, and then you bring all the little traumas, the relationships, the failed relationships, the jobs, the injuries, whatever, all the things that go on in your life that are traumas that we don't think are traumas, because we tend to believe that a trauma has to be like a blatant, huge, fucking just disgusting event, like a shooting or a stabbing or car accident, death in the family. Like, that's not the way it works. Trauma is anything that leaves a lasting impression on you in a negative way. Trauma is anything that happens in your life that you have to go through and take time to process it in order to live with it. Traumas aren't good. We know that. Traumas are always bad. They're never good. But how we handle them, how we deal with them, will determine whether or not we can move forward or if we stay stuck. And I was stuck. And in that week of May in 2023, when I was ready to end it, all I wanted to stop. I wanted everything to stop. I wanted to just stop thinking. I wanted to stop feeling. I wanted this to shut up. And I figured the only way to shut that thing up is to lodge a, 9mm bullet right in my dome piece. And I passed out. I woke up the next morning on the floor. I still had the gun. I checked it. It was loaded. And I'm like, what the fuck just happened? And that led me to the path of recovery. That event, that close call with the dark side, is what sent me down my road to recovery. And like I said, it's been, 3 years, May 5th. And I've had all this time to think about it. And in my journey of bettering my mental health and taking care of myself, I know one thing. I know that I did not want to die. I don't think that was my goal. I think I was so emotionally charged and so illogically conditioned that I knew I couldn't live like that anymore, but I didn't know a better way to stop it. And I think that's something that all of us at one point or another, or multiple times, come to that same crossroads where we don't want to die because we're fighters, right? We're fighters. Otherwise, we would have given up a long time ago. If you weren't a fighter, you wouldn't be watching me right now or listening to me right now. But because we're fighters, we don't want to quit and we don't want to give up, right? So for me, it was, I can't live this way anymore, but I don't know what comes next. Well, I'm shoot myself in the head. It'll be nice and easy. It'll be over. No suffering for everybody else. No more pain. No more misery. No more fucking living like shit. And that was the solution. And now I know, like I said, 3 years later, that I know for a fact that I didn't want to die. The other option of facing my fears, facing my demons, and moving forward was so fucking scary that I was willing to do that in order to not have to take the chance of going into the valley of the unknown. Now, completely insane thought process, right? We all know that. There's nothing logical about that. And I'll tell you, I'm the first one to say, like, I was out of my fucking head, like insane. Like, I don't even know how I was still working because I was so messed up all the time. And that was the day when I woke up and I had my gun and it was loaded and I couldn't remember what happened. That was a day that I finally said to myself, I can't do this anymore. I need help. Now, to me, that was a indirect way of admitting to myself that I was powerless over alcohol, thinking back on it. But I never said I was powerless over alcohol. I never said that. I knew my life was out of control. That part of it I got, that our lives have become unmanageable. I knew my life was unmanageable. It had been that way for a long time, but I just dealt with it. But when this event happened and I had reached that point where suicide was now a viable option, I knew that something had to change. So I reached out to a friend of mine who was a police officer. I reached out to my other friends. I did the research. And on May 5th, I was in rehab in Delray Beach, Florida. Now, granted, still at this time, I have not ever said that I'm an alcoholic. I have not ever said that I can't control alcohol. I have not even had that thought yet. I knew my life was a train wreck and I needed help with that. And I figured if I went to rehab, I could get away from the booze long enough to get sober to try to figure out what my next step was. So I still don't know if when I went to rehab, if I had gone there to get long-term sobriety or get a break to hit the reset button and start over. And in the course of my rehab, there's a lot of intensive therapy, a lot of group therapy, a lot of group sessions. And I'll be honest with you, I never admitted that I was powerless over alcohol until I got out of rehab. I was there 40, 46, 47 days. And I came home on July 18th. So May 5th to July 18th, do the math. I had still not admitted that I was powerless over alcohol. And I had been working the steps, quote unquote. You know, I had began to become aware of the 12 steps and what they were. And they were something that I planned on utilizing when I got out of rehab. My plan was, like everybody else, I'm going to do 90 and 90 and I'm going to go to therapy and I'm going to eat right. And I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to keep a daily planner and I'm going to meditate and I'm going to do breathing work. So I'm going to get 8 hours of sleep, what everybody says they're going to do when they leave. And I've talked about it before. I remember my first AA meeting after getting home. And it was a little church called the Doodle Road Church up in Cranberry Township. If you're from Cranberry, you know where it's at. And I walked in there. I think there was like 10 or 11 people in there. It wasn't a big meeting by any means. But I walked in there and I was, I just gotten home that day. And I was just a fucking ball of nerves. I was sitting in a corner all bunched up, squeezing my hands together. My knuckles were white and I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I felt better, that I was there. Now, I can't explain it. I mean, I could try, but it's just something you get when you go to an AA meeting. If you're there for the right reasons, if you're there to stay sober and find happiness and live a better life, some type of moment occurs where you realize that you are in the best place you can possibly be at that moment in time. And it's not because you're out of the house. It's not because you're around people. For me, it was because I was around people that understood what I had gone through without saying a word. Walking in that meeting and, saying, "Hey, my name's Mark. I'm an alcoholic." And something just happened. Act of God, epiphany, life-changing moment, whatever. That moment solidified to me two things. One, that I wanted to be happy again. If I can even remember the last time I was happy. I wanted to be happy. I didn't want to be miserable anymore. And I realized after listening for a good 40 minutes that I had no control over alcohol, my friends. And that was the day that I admitted to myself that I was powerless over alcohol. And, it's very hard to make that admission to yourself, let alone to other people. And to say, "Hey, I'm an alcoholic." I didn't say the words, "I'm admitting that I'm powerless over alcohol." I said I'm an alcoholic. And that's what an alcoholic is. Someone who is powerless over alcohol and their life has become unmanageable. And to me, that was saying that I was powerless over alcohol. Like in rehab, I danced around the subject a whole bunch of times and, I may have said it, just to like get people off my back, but I didn't really mean it. And I didn't really accept it and put my arms around it and give that bitch a bear hug until that first meeting. And moving forward after that, I was addicted to AA. I was going 3 and 4 times a day. I was going to every meeting I could. I slowly opened up to the process. Now, granted, the first step is an action step, right? We admit something and we accept something. It's an action step. We're doing something. Some of the steps aren't action steps. They're, I, am willing to do this. I'm willing to do that. It's a little different when you have an action step. And I think it's the way AA is set up. I think for me that first step couldn't be anything other than what it is. I don't see a logical progression from any other viewpoint if you don't start off with that admission, whether it's just saying I'm an alcoholic and then admitting it to yourself. You don't have to admit that to anybody else but yourself because you're the one that has to understand it. You're the one that has to accept it. And you're the one that has to live in it and figure out what to do about it. So, if you're like me, you probably know you have some issues. You probably know your life is unmanageable, but you're having problems getting to that point where you accept that there's nothing you can do to take control of your life as long as alcohol is your fucking friend. When you come to that point, that's when things start to, I'm not going to say they change right away, but slowly but surely things start to make sense. Once you admit to yourself that this disease, this affliction, this alcohol, this substance is controlling every aspect of your life, no matter how hard you try to insert your own control. You know as well as I do, the harder you try to control these things in your life that are messing you up, the worse they get, the worse the result is. You just keep going down this spiral and it doesn't stop and it won't stop until you make a distinct effort and change in viewpoint and change in belief system and change in desire of what you deem important in life. And to me, it was important to me to be alive. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know where this was going to lead me. I had no clue what was coming for me. I had a feeling a lot of it was going to be unpleasant. And some of it was. But I always say that my worst day in sobriety is better than my best day as an alcoholic ever. And I miss the good times. I miss the Sunday fun days with my friends. I miss having a beer at a game. I miss all those good times. But that shit's only fun until it's not fun anymore. And when it's not fun, if you don't enjoy it, then why are you doing it? And I think that's where we have to realize that we're doing it because that's the way we programmed ourselves to do it for whatever the underlying reason. This has become our standard operating procedure. This has become our way of life because it makes sense in some twisted way that if we do these things, if I drink, I don't have to deal with my problems. So, step one is extremely important. It's extremely important if we want to have a sobriety journey and not a sobriety pit stop. Because we can sit there and go, oh, I drink too much, or I want to slow down on my drinking. I think I do this, I think I do that. You can say that shit all day long. But until you actually make an effort to do something about it, scary or not, you don't have to do it alone. That's why AA exists. Granted, it's a business. They make money. Yeah, good. They should. Because without programs like AA, without programs like Smart Recovery and Recovery Dharma, without these, for lack of a better word, maps to success, we're never going to get there. I've said it before. I think AA is crucial in my recovery plan, in my recovery journey. Now, when I was in rehab, I was like, oh, I'm going to do Smart Recovery and I'm going to do the 12 steps. I'm going to do a hybrid. Never even tried Smart Recovery because once I got into the rooms of AA, I knew that this was what I needed at that point in my life, in that point in my journey. And, you can go to AA and you can be that guy that sits in the back, doesn't say anything, just listens, and that's okay. But don't be that guy or girl that goes to AA, sits in the back of the room, judging everyone without looking back at yourself. Because I can tell you from experience, I can look at any person in a room of AA and something they've gone through or something they say resonates with me. I've been there. I've done that. I know that feeling every single fucking time. And it really is kind of annoying. I'm not going to lie. Because, I really hate to be proven wrong. And when I started AA, I didn't think it was going to work. I didn't think I would associate with hardcore drunks and people that didn't have homes and lost everything because of the bottle. But over time, I've learned that the only thing keeping me from being the guy on the street corner with a brown paper bag, begging for money, wearing clothes that I haven't showered in fucking 3 weeks, I have no money. The only thing that kept me from going down that path was having that near-death experience. I guess that's the best way to call it. My quote-unquote suicide attempt. Having that moment where it just became very clear for the first time in my life that this is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to die. Whether I wreck a car or, shoot myself in the head. But chances are, my luck, I'm going to take somebody with me by accident. And to have those thoughts, and not just like, oh, I shouldn't drive drunk. No, like, this is why I shouldn't drive drunk. I'm going to kill somebody. And to look back on all the near misses and all the things that could have gone wrong and all the chances I took that I didn't need to take, and the years the hours, the money, all of the things, the relationships, the opportunities, all the things that I threw away because I couldn't admit to myself that I was no longer in control and that alcohol controlled me. Alcohol was my God. And, since then, I've returned to the church on my own terms because I said it early on when when we started this thing, early on in the podcast. We have to be self-aware. We have to know who we are. We have to know what we did and what we do and why we do it. If we don't know why we do something, then we're just putting a Band-Aid on an open chest wound. We're never going to stop the bleeding. We're never going to save our own lives. And, at the end of the day, the choice to live is ours. We may think because we're an alcoholic or because we're an addict that we don't have a choice in this game. I'm here to tell you do. We always have a choice. The problem is that choice can be so scary and can seem so difficult that we just don't do it. And all of us know that when you change a behavior, when you change something, like say you change a routine at the gym, it takes you a few weeks before you adjust. And it's, you may feel shittier in the gym. You may feel like it's not as much fun, or you may feel like you're not getting anything accomplished. But we got to drag our feet through the mud in order to find the clean, beautiful beaches to hang out on. And for me, it all started that first week of May in 2023. It's when the journey started. But the actual recovery started when I admitted that I was powerless over alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable and that I could no longer live the lifestyle I was living. I needed to change something. And if it wasn't for that set of circumstances, I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't be over 3 years sober. I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't have my wife, who I love dearly. I wouldn't have my dogs or my house. I wouldn't have any of this because chances are I'd be dead or in jail, getting a DUI, making some fucking stupid mistake on a job, getting myself in a jackpot. And it is such a relief to not have to justify myself anymore. I do this. I justify myself to you guys. I bear all to you. Now, do I do this with the people in my life? My wife, yes. A couple of my friends, yes. But you get the whole story because through the rooms of AA, I said it before, I spent my whole life trying to fit in, low self-esteem, all that crap. And no matter how successful I became, I was still never happy. I was still never comfortable. I always felt like I was on the outside looking in and I wasn't part of the group. And, when I started dedicating myself to AA and to my recovery, I found that, ironically enough, the people that are my people are the people in the rooms of AA and NA, because we go through the same things. My family is people who are struggling to keep their head above water, to keep themselves alive, to find a way to live that doesn't self-destruct every 5 minutes. You are my people. And that's why I do this. And that's why I'm going to continue to do this. So I need you guys' input. I need you to tell me what you think. I need you to get a hold of me if you want to be on the show. Once again, share, help, repeat. That is the motto. It's right behind me on the wall. We got to share our experiences. We got to try and help other people. And every chance we get, we got to make it happen. Because if we're not doing it for each other, how are we going to continue to build this community of sober people fighting to help other sober people? This is a community that stretches across the world. You don't know the guy in England. You don't know the guy in Chicago. You don't know the woman that's living in Australia who's dealing with addiction, but you do, because they're you. They're us. So that is step one of the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous by Mark Kneebone, also known as Uncle Mark. I will be back again soon with my beautiful wife, Princess Chiquita. And then we will also pursue step two. And just to give you a little homework, step two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Till next time. Love you guys.